Good morning, everybody. Ask that you please take your seats. We have a big crowd and people apparently are still coming. The rain held people up, but I'm delighted to see so many here. Let me introduce our Dean and President, Anthony Crowell.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Ross. Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony Crowell, the Dean and President here at New York Law School, also the Director of our Center for New York City and State Law. And Ross, you have built something truly special with our center more than 30 years ago, creating this magnificent space for the most important dialogues that affect our city and state. And I'm so appreciative of all you've done. And you are just a phenomenal colleague, and we're so proud that you are our Samuel Seabury Professor of Law and that you do so many wonderful things for our students. I also want to acknowledge today Ben Max, our Executive Editor and Program Director, as well as our center staff, including Steve Lewis, who is the counsel to the center, Senior Fellow and Director of the Census and Redistricting Institute, Jeff Weiss, CityLaw Editor Veronica Rose, and our Administrative Coordinator, Rose White. This morning, we are honored to host First Deputy Mayor Dean Fuleihan for our 202nd City Law Breakfast. I like to say sometimes, and you don't know this, although I'm the Dean of the Law School, Dean is the Dean of City Government. As many of you know, we consider ourselves New York's law school, and we are the law school for public service in our state. 1/3 of our graduates go into public service and public interest law each year, and in New York City and state and in the federal government. And we're very proud of that. Of course, our public service engagements at the law school are wide. It's not just at the Center for New York City and State Law, but they cut across 5 other academic centers and throughout our curriculum. And we've really expanded the variety of programming we offer across the school. Of course, these traditional city law conversations and briefings, but also candidate debates, policy forums, book talks, and other timely programs on issues such as the housing crisis that we will soon announce. So we are really very honored to welcome the First Deputy Mayor here today. Ross is going to give a more fulsome introduction of him, but I will just say that as someone who came out of city government and who experienced the transition from the Giuliani administration to the Bloomberg administration firsthand, particularly during an incredibly difficult time, I fully appreciate what the First Deputy Mayor is going through in terms of coordinating a transition and experiencing one of the most consequential budget cycles of our time. And we are truly fortunate as New Yorkers to have someone with his immense talents to be leading that effort. So without any further ado, I'll have Ross come up and give a more fulsome introduction, and we will get started. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Dean Crowell, for the acknowledgement. First, let me welcome everybody. Thank you for attending. This is the 202nd breakfast, as the Dean said. I want to thank particularly our founding sponsors, Greenberg Traurig, the law firm of Greenberg Traurig, Con Edison, and Verizon. Have been with us from the beginning, and we thank them. We also thank all of you who have a gold star on your name. You are individual contributors. We love that you do that. We thank you so much for helping to support these breakfasts. We are delighted to have Dean Fuleihan here today, so early in the administration. It's really important for us, and I can see by the number of people who signed up and are here that they think it's important as well. So thank you for being here. Dean Fuleihan is the son and grandson of Lebanese immigrants. He grew up in Syracuse, New York. He earned a bachelor's degree in economics from Alfred University and studied public finance at the Maxwell School of Syracuse University. In 1978, Dean Fuleihan started his long career in government as a policy analyst for the New York State Assembly, and he stayed there for 33 years. He rose to be Speaker Sheldon Silver's top budget person, and it was an important, maybe the key, most critical person in the annual budget negotiations between the governor and the state legislature. After leaving the state legislature, he brought his experience to City Hall, where he became budget director and then first deputy mayor in the administration of Mayor Bill de Blasio. He now returns to City Hall as first deputy mayor to Zoran Mandani. And Mayor Mandani is the second youngest mayor of New York, as we all know, the first being Hugh Grant, who was the mayor in 1889 to 1892. Mayor Mamdani's appointment of Dean Fuleihan was greeted by some commentators with relief. A New York Magazine wrote that Dean Fuleihan's appointment reassured people who were skeptical of the Mamdani administration, and it described Dean Fuleihan as an old school New York politico who probably knows better than anyone alive how to move a mayoral agenda through the state legislature. Governor Hochul agreed. She said that Dean Fuleihan is a steady, principled public servant who has dedicated his career to making government work for New Yorkers. His experience and integrity will be invaluable at City Hall. High praise. Dean Fuleihan, who is 74 years old, congratulations, was working with the state legislature in Albany during the years when the city of New York fought its way out of the fiscal crisis of 1975. The state legislature played an enormous role in that effort, and Dean Fuleihan was there and part of that process. It is nice to know that a first deputy mayor of the city of New York has experienced firsthand that fiscal crisis. Dean Fuleihan has been a sound and wise budget maker. It is with great pleasure and confidence that I welcome Dean Fuleihan to the City Law Breakfast Forum.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Ross, for that introduction. It was very generous. Hopefully, over this administration, we can live up to that. I'll do a couple of corrections. It's not my favorite one, but I'm 75. And while I started my career in 1978, I was obviously not there for the actual fiscal crisis, but was there for the aftermath and the players who were instrumental in that. Some became very dear friends, such as Richard Ravitch, who went on to become a lieutenant governor. And actually all of that group has a huge part in what is the New York City budget process, what we have inherited, and how New York City budgets, which is so fundamentally different from really most other state and local governments in the country. And it's a legacy to be proud of and work within. It has its own challenges, as we're seeing right now, that we're trying to deal with. So to Anthony Kroll, thank you for hosting us today. To Ben Max, wherever Ben, thank you, who convinced me during the transition to do this. I also have to acknowledge my friend and former OMB colleague, the senior vice president here at CFO at the New York Law School, PV, who is not here yet, so we have to give him a hard time for that, but he actually could do this. He is one of many incredibly dedicated people at the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget that helped and were kind enough to put up with my daily and sometimes hourly questions when I came from Albany to New York City to learn the New York City budget process. It is very different and therefore requires a whole new education. It's not something that normally we think of. You think you deal with budgets for really years, 33 years, that you would know what it is, but it actually is a very different place. So again, thank you for having me. So quickly, I want to frame the presentation on the preliminary budget. A few key histories, which we've already started, that define this unique process that comes out of the mid-1970s fiscal crisis, and actually the 1989 charter revision that ended the Board of Estimates. and move to really the mayor and the city council dominating the budget process. So I'm going to do an overview of the preliminary budget. We'll get there, but the goal really will be to proceed quickly to the slides. So forgive me if I jump fast through this, but I'd like to get to questions and answers. All right. So let's go back. So I didn't go back. Now we're back. So the budget, what is this thing, right? It is, and there are many experts in this, and there are many people who deal with this from your different unique perspectives, whether it's academic, press, or agencies or monitors. But it is the place where the city presents its priorities. I'm biased, obviously. Yes, I'm first deputy mayor, but my history is in budget making, and it's where you define what you care about. It's where you actually set, these are our values, these are our priorities, this is what agencies should be doing. It provides priorities, values, direction, oversight, and are we achieving those priorities, right? It defines that process, and it does it within the constraint, right? There's only that's why those of us who do this really enjoy it. It's not simply about the numbers on a page. It's about, okay, how are you balancing this and how are you setting those priorities? And then you go through a very particular process in New York that allows for a great deal of back and forth. So, couple other key points, and I apologize, they're not on the slides, but they're implicit in it. Local government in New York is the provider of services, right? That's where, and New York City is just fundamentally unique, right? We provide normal municipal services, right? We do snow, ice, in case any of you missed it. So we provide the services of roads, refuge, right? We sanitation, public safety. That's normally what's done in cities around New York State, but New York State is also the social service provider. Outside of New York City, it's counties. So we are the social service provider for the state. So the entire public welfare system, homeless, all operates out of New York City. And New York City is also unique in that it is the public education system for early education, which we're announcing every single day. And I hope you appreciate that through 12th grade. So that, and obviously we contribute significantly to higher education through CUNY. So that fundamentally is a core piece of how you have to look at the city. The city also is the economic, you're going to see this in several slides, right? The city is the economic engine of New York. We're 60% of the GDP, and actually that's grown over from 2010 to 2020 by 10%. So it's a significant growth. And we represent over 54% of the revenues that go into the state budget. And in return, we get about 40.5%. It's about a $21 billion difference. And no, we're not asking the state to give us $21 billion. We'd like that. But it is part of what we're saying is stop the drain. And it's a recognition that we are now in a fiscal problem that we inherited. And we're looking to the state to help, and the state has stepped forward. The governor has already, in 30-day amendments, put in additional $1.5 billion. And the governor and the mayor on the 8th day of this administration announced a huge commitment towards early education. A $1.7 billion statewide commitment. That's $1.2 billion in New York City to cover the first 2 years of the 4-year plan to get to fix both the system for 3-year-olds and to make it universal in New York City for 2 years. The last piece, I do have to say that report on the amount of money going to New York State and the amount New York City receives was by the CUNY Institute of State and Local Governance and the New School Center for New York City Affairs, which came out in December, which just happened to be one of the authors. So I highly recommend it. The other point to make on this, to emphasize it, if you look at the size of the city and state budget is effectively double the size. Don't hold me to the exact numbers, but it's effectively double. And the workforce in the city is much larger than the state. It's part of an understanding that the state is collecting these revenues, is federal and huge amounts of federal money, and is redistributing these around the state. Some of it goes to debt service, some of it goes to reserves, but they are basically redistributing that. They also have some direct services, but much more compliance and oversight role, while New York City has the role of delivery of services. Okay. Not my favorite slide, but it, this is what budget documents look like. One thing I did learn at when I was at CUNY, I always assumed that budgets that we did a great job, both the state and city, at transparency and understanding budgets. And then I was outside of city government and couldn't call up somebody and say, give me a table on the following 20 things. And I was literally doing my own research. And, it's a very confusing document. So one of the things I hope we'll try to do is make it more transparent as we proceed. But obviously, this is what it is, right? This is not the pages that people normally look at, but it is, here's personal service, here's other than personal service. They're under unit of appropriations, and you'll hear huge levels of conflict between the budget office and city council and council finance on what should be a unit appropriation, where the governor should have, where the mayor should have flexibility, and where there should be oversight. So that's an annual balancing act that goes every single year. Okay. So the city basically, we just talked about personal service and others. There are two main budgets the city does. They come out in many bills. There's a revenue bill, there's an expense bill, there's a contracting bill, there's the capital budget. But primarily, when we talk about the financial plan of the city, we're talking about operating revenues and expenses, and then we're talking about the capital budget. So again, I'm going to run through this, but this is important, and it is very different in New York. So if you start actually in the middle at January and February, so the mayor presents a preliminary budget. That budget has to be balanced under generally accepted accounting principles. That is very unique in the country. It comes directly out of the fiscal crisis. Everybody in the country, all state and local governments, report under generally accepted accounting principles. Very few places actually budget under generally accepted accounting principles. Anyone who's had a fiscal crisis, Detroit, Washington, most recently Puerto Rico, requirements have been placed on all three, on the two cities and the territory of Puerto Rico, that they must end up to get out of their fiscal crisis, have to budget under generally accepted accounting principles. The state budget's under cash. Most places do. There are now more places moving to it. Connecticut's moved to it recently. It has much more strict standards about what you do. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that happens in January and February, the preliminary budget. That's what we came out with. That's what created certain amount of controversy. And then on May 1st, there will be an executive budget. That date had been moved as of 2 years ago in a city charter amendment. So now it's May 1st. And then there's the adoption. So the budget will be completely updated on May 1st. And then there's the adoption that occurs in June to begin the fiscal year of July 1st. And then there's the November update. So the city literally, right, does budgets almost continuously. We are in a constant budget. Everybody at OMB believes it never ends, and truthfully, it never ends. That is different when all of you are observers of the state, and you know really it's a one-time process. There are times when things happen and the state has to come back and deal with it, but it is not something they like to do. It is not something, it's the normal procedure. Every one of these quarterly changes has with it budget actions that the council can take. So it's a constant process, and that's a process that comes out of also the reform, that you're constantly looking and modifying the financial plan, which modifies the actual budget documents. So this just shows historical how much the state and federal government are contributing stake. So the upcoming budget, it's $127 billion. State grants are currently 16% of that budget, and federal is currently 6%. We hope the state will be much higher than 16%. That's part of the effort that we're right now, I believe, successfully discussing in Albany. The one house budgets come out, I believe, Monday, and then they'll start acting on them. And we are obviously looking for additional resources to deal with the problem at hand, the crisis at hand that we're dealing with. The federal number at 6%, traditionally, I would have told you that's going to increase. It does normally through every single quarter as more money comes in, as the federal budget gets done. I'm not going to make any guesses about what's going to be in or not in the federal budget. So 6% is a cautious number, and that's where we should stay at this point. So we have an expense budget balanced at $122 billion, a preliminary budget for fiscal year 27 at $127 billion, and the 5-year capital plan at $113 billion. Quickly, I've sort of already done this, but the fiscal crisis, it dramatically changed what happened in New York. And there are many very good documents and books. There's a movie out on it now too, about what that history is and why it happened. And it happened for all sorts of reasons. It happened for the economic trend that we knew that was the deindustrialization that happened in the Northeast and happened dramatically in New York City. There was population decline, but there was clearly financial mismanagement as the city tried to continue to provide services. It led to dramatic reductions in the city workforce. It changed long-term the delivery. Many of you are with nonprofit communities. It's really how the city, after the fiscal crisis, started to provide social services that it can no longer do directly. It put huge constraints it put significant constraints on what the city could issue in debt. So the city right now can only issue for capital purposes. Most of our financing in New York City is done through bonds. The vast majority of it, and there are many different entities that do this, general obligation bonds. I can go through as separate water authorities, transition finance authority. Anybody wants to talk about it, I'm happy to. But the city does its capital budget through debt financing, but it is only capital. It has serious constraints that came out of the financial crisis where they were literally bonding for operating expenses, and that led to the problem. Actually, if you look at Washington, Detroit, Puerto Rico, basically same thing happened. And on this slide, I actually don't know most of the people, and just to be clear. That's who's raising her hand. I did know Hugh Carey. So, all right. So we walked in with expecting difficult situation, but not really understanding the depth of what had happened. We were used to a debate where there's a natural play here, right? The city council says there's more revenues, the budget office says there's less. Outside monitors can be anywhere in that domain. And there's historically the question, is there underspending? And that's a normal process. And so we expected that. What we did not expect was the level of underspending that was not being. And that was the piece that really surprised us. So we ended up with, and I know there's a lot of questions about, how accurate was that? Why were we so surprised? Is it a real deficit? Was there real underspending? And we obviously, and the mayor showed this, that there were historic levels. Even in the November plan, there were significant gaps, but we confronted much more. This was the actual underspending in these key areas: cash assistance, rental assistance, shelter, $7.5 billion. In other areas, there's another basically $7 billion in these areas that were never accounted for. The health insurance stabilization fund. Okay, they didn't account for it. It's $1.1 billion that the city was responsible for that was never included in. So all these things added up to basically a $14 billion problem that we had to address. And I understand this became somewhat confusing, but we basically started with what the two city controllers and the state controller had put out. And the city controller really at the same time that we talked about, we have a $12 billion problem. And that $12 billion problem had already included some additional issues. And then when the mayor testified in Albany, the problem was $7 billion because we had aggressively talked about revenue estimates. And we had already started to say, okay, we're going to have to do $1.7 billion of savings. And then the governor gave us an additional $1.5 billion. And that led to the problem that we're now confronted with, which is the $5.4 billion. And the way we dealt with the $5.4 billion was property tax increase, which provides $3.7 billion. And the rest of the actions are all reserves. It's not the first thing we want to do. We would rather reserves be there for an economic downturn or some other crisis, not one that actually is internal to the city. But we had to address this. So we addressed it with the city has two types of reserves. There are in-year reserves, which are build up at the beginning, and by the end of the year, you take down. We're taking them down in the beginning of the fiscal year. So we're going down from 1.45 billion to 100. We intend in fiscal year 28, 29 to restore those. So we intend to put those back in because we do believe we need a strong reserve system. But again, we are required And the city has done a gap balance budget since 1981. The state law required it from 1982. The city, under Ed Koch, was able to do that in 1981. And the city, every single budget has been gap balanced. There was no choice. We needed people to say, why didn't you say here are different options? Because that's not the way. That's not the legacy of that fiscal crisis. It's not, by the way, the Financial Control Board of New York State still exists. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in existence last year. It does not have the power in the beginning of during the fiscal crisis. It had the power to abrogate contracts, had the power to approve every single budget line. It had the power to approve every single budget issuance. Now it's simply a monitor. And by the way, New York City has more monitoring agencies than I think anyone else. That's a good thing. There's the state controller who has a special deputy controller for New York City that came out of the fiscal crisis. There's the role defined in the charter for the New York City controller. There's the independent budget office, which was established in the 1989 charter revision, which once again dealt with the power sharing, got rid of the Board of Estimate, which had a huge amount of power on the budget process. Supreme Court decision was unconstitutional, and it moves to then the mayor and the city council, but also created as the independent budget office. And I was here last year because they were celebrating their anniversary, and there was a whole day conference on the history and the role of the independent budget office. And then there are many, there are independent entities, the rating agencies, which all happen to be headquartered in New York City. There's the CBC, they're having their event tonight. There's the Fiscal Policy Institute. So all of that is part of how you should look at it. They all provide information. And while the city controllers were saying there was the city controller and the state controller were saying there was a problem, no one truly believed the magnitude of it and that we would actually have to address $14 billion over those 2 years. Okay, I know this can make everybody, and we could spend a lot of time on this. I have 3 financial plan charts. I promise to go quickly here and then we'll get to questions. This is what OMB would call the gap sheet. This is what happened from November into February, and this identifies the differences, right? So this has the if you look down, it has in fiscal year 27, the 3.7 billion. It has the governor's 1.5 billion that helped reduce the deficit to 5.4. It has a savings attempt of 1.7 billion. And it also reflects the out-year gaps. These out-year gaps are actually historically within a range of about 7%. It's probably, it's okay, but it's assuming a lot. It's assuming that we are reducing the reserves in 27. It's assuming that the state is giving us this money. It's assuming that somehow there's a $3.7 billion number that's also being filled. And that continues, because what we have is a structural problem on services we do want to provide. Yes, can we do services better? Can we find savings? Yes. But these are services that are fundamental to the city, and the mayor ran on an agenda of not just delivering excellence, but addressing affordability. Part of that affordability agenda is childcare, but there are many other components, and those components need to be financed. So I'm going to keep going. If anybody wants me to, I'll come back. Here's the point. It's 14 billion in the presentation, and new spending is 576 million. And by the way, the 576 million includes 100 million for snow. It's not exactly what we had in mind. So the part, because we are constantly being challenged, find more, do things more efficiently. Yes, we are 2 months in, but okay. It's fair. We're creating, the mayor issued an executive order, chief savings officers in every agency. I promise, we are driving them. We are constantly in touch with them daily to figure out how we can find things and challenge not the delivery of services, but the better delivery of services. And there must be ways to find savings. We need to obviously show that we're doing our part when we're asking other people to contribute more, whether that's through the state legislature and the governor, or that's through additional tax dollars. So, and those reports are, but it's going to be an ongoing position, but they're doing, I'm sorry, I didn't, yes, March 20th. Obviously, when the mayor presented this, no one surprised in the room. He did say that there should be a tax on the wealthiest New Yorkers. We do believe New York can afford that. We do believe that this is an economic engine. I have many debates. I'm quite sure there's CBC colleagues in here, and I'm happy to continue that debate on whether millionaires are growing in New York or not, and what they look like in the metropolitan region, and how we compare with California and Florida. We believe, particularly with what's happened at the federal government, that the wealthy can pay more. But we also, and we have put out a menu of additional tax options to both houses and the governor to say there are other ways to also do this that meet our principles, our values, and provide permanent structural revenue for us. And the other one is, again, the report that came out of CUNY ISLG and the New School on what New York contributes, and the fact that New York continues to be a stronger and stronger engine. If you look at the growth of revenue in New York State over that same 10-year period, 60% of that revenue growth literally is from New York City. It's from New York City residents, it's from New York City workers, and it's from New York City business. I'm done. I'll take questions.
Okay. Then we're going to have a microphone. We'd like you to come down to the microphone, line up. And this is a large audience. There should be a lot of questions. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask them all. I don't want to do that. But let me thank Dean Fuleihan for giving us a really wonderful introductory lecture and also a scary chart. How big was that number?
It was the 14 billion was big.
Okay, let's begin. First question, Michael.
I'm Michael Myers. I'm the president of the New York Civil Rights Coalition. Wilbur Tatum, when he was publisher, owner of the Amsterdam News, wrote column after column after column to the government. How do you save a city? How do you govern a city? And my question to you is, we at the New York Civil Rights Coalition, we have constituents, we have people, we have clients. We have written at least 3 times to the mayor, to the police commissioner, and to you. Not only to the city administration email address, but to your former email address. We have never gotten an answer from any of them, including yourself. So my question to you is, how in the hell do you govern a city when we can't get responses? Civil rights organizations can't get responses from our government officials.
Okay, don't walk away. Don't walk away. I apologize. We'll make sure you get a response today. So just make sure we have your email at the end of this to make sure we did it. Please don't send it to my old email address. I can't access it. But the new one, definitely. And we will respond today. I apologize.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the tutorial. There's already indication that the projected increases in personal, corporate, and property tax, you know what I'm going to ask, are going to create a very significant flight from the city that in the short and long term will be highly detrimental all around, including to the budget process.
So you're not going to be surprised at my answer that I don't We don't agree. It's worthy of a debate, of course. Huge amounts of reductions to the very wealthy have occurred. At the federal level, there are all, and we do believe, and we actually think the affordability crisis is very real, but we think that's a crisis of working New Yorkers and not of the very wealthy. And we're asking them to contribute really what's a small amount more to help deliver services, to help provide universal child care, to do fast and free buses, yes, to expand the affordability of New York so the major corporations in this city have a workforce that can live and work in this. And that's our fundamental argument. And New York is growing in millions. It just is. The region, the entire region share is basically the same as 10 years ago. We have more than Florida and Texas combined, right? We have wealth here, and we're not looking for that kind of flight. We want to keep creating. We want economic opportunity in here, and we believe we can achieve both.
Hi, my name is Patrick Hall. As someone who runs a mom and pop storefront here in Tribeca, a business that's been around for more than 40 years, and who has had to navigate moves and leases and permits and pandemics and inspections and insurance and audits, the whole maze, I really feel the difference between policy on paper and policy in practice. When you said that it really resonated with me when you said that you want to move government from no to how. So what would that shift look like concretely for a small business owner this year? So
thank you for the 40 years. And we know it's not easy. So it looks to changing a whole approach to economic development in this city to say, actually, what do small business owners need? Yes, we do care about major real estate developments. I mean, the mayor just talked about Sunnyside Yards and the potential there, but we need a government that is much more efficient, easier to access, that does get to a yes, and figures out ways to cut through bureaucracy so you actually know how that's happening. That it is what. Again, it's 2 months. We're trying. I think you've seen some of our agencies already out there, but we care deeply about this problem. You should hold us accountable. I hope you can come back next year and say, yes, you actually saw things that are making government easier for you to access and address, and that there's less burdensome fees and bureaucratic hurdles you have to do to get there.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Team, regarding the executive budget, you stated it starts on 5/1. What was the previous date? And why exactly was it changed?
I think, let's go back. I'll get there. Almost. You're talking about this.
Yes, you say it starts on 5/1, but it started on an earlier date. Then it was
So
changed.
July, the reason it's done this way, and I know we confuse everybody even when we try to simplify, so I apologize. The fiscal year of New York City is July 1st
Right.
to June 3rd, right? But to get to July 1st, you actually start in January. You actually start February 1st this year, right? And you start with a preliminary budget. And that addresses both the current year and the upcoming year. And then we do an executive budget, which is May 1st. And that's another proposal. And by the way, in between these, there's public comment, city council hearings, right? The city council will bring in the budget director and every single agency after the preliminary budget in February 1st and challenge them. Why did you do this? What's right about this? You go on for hours, appropriate. and they'll ask for public comment. Then when the executive budget comes out. Now, one of the keys of that executive budget on May 1st, we then know what the state's done. Right? So we'll know what is the final result from the state of New York, and then we make the modifications. We'll have better revenue estimates. We'll make those modifications in May. Then we go through another round of city council hearings and public input. And that leads to the adopted budget in June. Does that help?
Okay, but I'm saying, but my question was, what was the original effective? It's now May 1.
It was not, the city fiscal year has always been, okay, two different things. City fiscal year has always been July 1. 2 years ago, there was a charter revision commission that moved the May date for, it used to be April 16th. And they moved it to May 1st. I believe they did that partly to make sure that the state budget was adopted and they would know what was going to be in the state budget.
Thank you. I was alive in 1975, by the way.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Thanks for staying in.
Just a second. I see the line is long, so just ask the questions be short so that everybody gets a chance.
Wonderful. My name is Daniel Truman, and I was wondering if you were at all concerned that drawing down reserves will negatively affect the perception of New York City bonds and eventually drive up borrowing costs.
Okay, so New York City bonds are incredibly safe. The coverage ratio is great on a New York City bond. Transitional Finance Authority bonds are AAA rated. General obligation bonds are AA plus rated. We have very strong credit rating. But to your point, the reason go back to it. I did. So I apologize. I went too fast, but actually let's talk about it. So the reason that, well, give up. The reason we are restoring the reserves in the financial plan in fiscal year 28, 29, and 30 is because we don't want to draw down these reserves. We recognize that both the in-year reserves at $1.45 billion, we need to get back to that because that's a security on cash flow needs, and that we need to get back to at least we're right now, if we draw down these reserves, we're at about $6 billion in reserves, and the city should have a higher reserve level. So we're saying in fiscal 28, 29, and 30, we need to get back to that. Needs to be a priority of this administration.
Thank you.
Hi, Tom Flashen, a prospective law student. A lot has been written about the inequality and effective tax rates between Park Slope, brownstones, Canarsie row houses. The assessment caps have led us there. Is the Department of Finance considering lowering the assessment ratio, as is within their power, on Class 1 properties to ameliorate the effects of this inequality?
Wow, great question. And a very complicated question. So there are a couple of answers to this. The first, let's put it back in the budget. So we did an increase that produces $3.7 billion in the property. We do not want to do that. It's the necessity of balancing this budget under generally accepted accounting principles, and there was no choice but to do that. We believe the $1.7 billion in savings was a lot on a city whose workforce over the past 4 years has significantly declined. And if anything, there's a concern about the delivery services. So while we think services can be improved upon, we also believe $1.7 billion is a serious savings. So, and we drew down reserves, but there's a limit to how much we should be drawing down given the current. That left the property tax. So we don't want to do that tax increase. You're asking a more fundamental question for which there is current litigation, tax equity. Yes. So there is current litigation that's been going on for the past several years about how to address the inequities of the property tax. You listed. We know that there is not equity horizontally across New York City. There are some neighborhoods that are not, neighborhoods across New York are not taxed equal. We accept that, we acknowledge it, we need to deal with it. There are two ways to do it. Permanent way, which is through legislation. And the mayor committed. He committed this multiple times during the campaign. He committed to it in testimony in Albany. We will be submitting a property tax reform bill to Albany that will permanently address these. You're also suggesting that there are administrative things that can happen in the meantime. It's not a permanent solution, because if we don't get rid of those caps you're talking about, it's not a permanent solution. So that is part of a conversation we're obviously going to be having. But we also feel there needs to be a permanent structural change to this, and that has to happen. For anybody who wants to know, the property tax system in New York is New York City, which is different than everywhere else in the state except for Nassau. Is highly confusing and complicated and really hard to understand, but it is not fair.
With Dean Fuleihan's permission, we'll finish the line of people and ask that when we get to the end of the line, that'll be the end of the session.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Rob Sakota. Your presentation clearly shows you need additional revenue to balance the budget and meet the mayor's spending priorities. And you've noted that income taxes have certain restraints at the state level. As the prior question noted, property taxes, complexities, and other political issues. What are your thoughts about additional revenues or increased revenues from charging on street parking, both from changing from the current flat rate system to a perhaps more dynamic rate system, which might have other benefits, and from metering many more spaces than we currently do? It seems to me that given the large amount of essentially free street parking here in New York City, that's an untapped source of additional revenue, which I understand to be actually under the control of the city versus something like income taxes.
Yeah. So, yes, we should be looking at all those things. They're not going to address a $5.4 billion problem, but they are policy objectives and we do care about fast and free buses, and we do care about safety in city streets and getting to real vision zero. So all those things on how we deal with this, with New York City streets are in our control, and we're going to keep working to address it. But in fairness, it doesn't address this problem, which needs a broad-based structural change. So it's not a no.
Every little bit helps, but thank you.
Correct.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning to Dean. Any chance on the budget you'll include the Fair Fares program, which reduces fares from like $3 to $1.45, especially for high poverty areas?
So what? There are, obviously, we care about this issue. The mayor ran on fast and free buses. It's getting to places where where we know who takes those buses, and we know where the service really is needed desperately in places the subway system in particular doesn't. So we care about these deeply. We're going to be in negotiations. That's part of the public discussion, but we have to solve this fundamental structural problem, and we need your help to solve that fundamental structural problem so that we're not having this conversation every single month. Or I'm sorry, every quarter. Like, what are we going to do May 1st? What are we going to do June? What are we going to do next November? How do we do this? There are real needs that we need to address. You're talking about one of those needs, which is the cost of transit in New York City, which is the main way people work. And how we do that, we understand how important it is, but we have to solve this and get a permanent structural change and have people who can afford to pay the taxes to provide those services, to address the affordability agenda, which is really what you're talking about. And we agree. We need that, but we need to address.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Adeze Okoli, and my question is really around like the values around the budget. Earlier in the presentation, you talked about a budget being reflective of not only your values, but also the priorities. Obviously, affordability is a huge piece of that. I help run a food access nonprofit called Rethink Food, and we provide meals at scale for many New Yorkers in need. Just on Sunday, many people with the new work requirements are no longer going to be able to access SNAP in the way that they were able to previously. And so going back to that values question, how are we kind of addressing or where specifically in the budget do you kind of see food security issues being addressed?
So we did start to address the food insecurity issue, but you're raising a much bigger issue, which is how we're dealing with the SNAP work requirements. Matter of fact, more work requirements the federal government's going to keep doing and providing that. Like it's one of the major issues, and like it's a priority of the administration. I mean, I think you'll see it reflected through not just the preliminary budget where we did do an ad, but you'll see it continuing to be reflected. I mean, literally, I just met on this yesterday. It's a serious priority, and I have a feeling it's one of many priorities that we're going to see coming down from the federal government that we have to figure out how to respond to. But our goal is the mayor's articulated this constantly, is the safety of New Yorkers. And
Wonderful.
Food security has to be a primary part of safety.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Good morning. One area of the budget I don't hear spoken about much is the approach to collecting money that is owed to the city. Are your chief savings officers getting a mandate to collect on what is owed to these various agencies? I mean, HPD gets regularly judgments of $1 million against bad landlords that they never collect.
Yes.
DEP did a press conference several years ago for about $1 billion in unpaid bills, and some of those are 100,000 by hotels or whatnot. I'm just curious, does this administration have a different or better way of collecting on what's owed to the city?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, we intend, particularly in the housing area, to be very forceful in how we're going to do this. We are in certain areas going to suggest amnesty. It won't be there to try to get some money in and start that process over again. We put a significant amount of new auditors in the Department of Finance because we know we're not collecting just major taxes the way we should. We're putting more attorneys in the Department of Law because we're not properly dealing with liability claims against the city. We're just letting them happen and settling and not challenging where we need to. So our answer is yes on all these issues. I'm happy for any suggestions you have. We'll take them in. It's an important area.
Morning. My name is Christopher Campo. I wanted to ask about revenue estimation. Obviously, I think the gap that we're seeing right now with the budget is you could make a case that there's a lot of error in revenue estimation, especially considering that the number that OMB picks for revenue becomes the financial plan, and everybody has to live with it. So
yes,
there is documentation on OMB's website of how revenue estimation is done, but it's not really auditable. It's hard to reverse engineer it. So my question is, how can we make that more transparent? Thanks.
So many parts of that question. So there clearly the assumption is that OMB underestimates revenue, and City Council will then say there's more revenue. Same thing happens in New York State between the governor and state legislature. We did this year a very aggressive revenue. So we matched the state, including what they agreed to just Sunday when they did the consensus forecasting. We're basically matching what they think, legislative and state, are the growth in the personal income tax and the corporate taxes. So this was a much more aggressive one. I will not be surprised if when the monitors come out, and I expect reports over the next month, that you'll see people saying we're too aggressive. So I think you're going to see a different than what you historically have seen. However, on your transparency, I'm totally there. Anything you want to give me on this, now that I've actually experienced it when I was at CUNY, to try to understand what we're saying, of course, we should be more transparent. We're happy to work. We're happy to work on this. I want to work. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hendrik Townley. The civic tech community was really interested in language in Executive Order 12 around insourcing work that's currently done by outside vendors and consultants. And that's because we currently think that a lot of the IT and software vendors the city interacts with often deliver very expensive services for the value that's given. And we're hopeful about in-house technology teams to do more with less. I'm curious about like any policy obstacles you see in terms of like enabling like in-housing when that's cost effective.
So we totally agree on the objective. Are there any hurdles to that? Sure. Everybody gets very used to how they've done it and who they've been using in some cases for years as outside, and you become very dependent. So there's always a risk and a concern about making that change. But no, we need to achieve $1.7 billion savings. We need to achieve long-term structural savings, not just one time. And that's a way to do it. So we're totally in agreement there, but are there hurdles? Oh yeah, we are moving people where they normally would not want.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Let me thank the, please say that again. Let me thank the questioners. I thought the questions were very good, and I really appreciate the quality and also the fact that everybody was short so that everybody got a chance to ask the question. I also want to thank the Fuleihan for really a stimulating morning and a wonderful walk down memory lane of the fiscal crisis, those of us who remember it very well. And as we like to do at these breakfasts, we like to give a book or a product of the law school or something related to the talk or vaguely related to the talk. And I think this may be a little bit like Cole's to Newcastle, but I have a book called by Fred Ferretti, The Year the Big Apple Went Bust. A month-to-month chronology in 500 pages of what went wrong in 1975. And I hope that you have a chance to read this.
Thank you so much. I promise to read this. I'll report back. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming today.